You know that moment? You're in the middle of a huge problem: work, money, health, a relationship that's falling apart. And someone looks at you and asks, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" And you smile and you say no. And you carry that all by yourself, again. It's not just a one-time thing, it's your pattern. You go over the same route 3 times before asking for directions. You let things escalate to the breaking point before mentioning that something is wrong. You get close to asking, and at the very last second, you pull back. And you know what people call that? Pride, stubbornness, coldness, having trouble opening up. But the cold, hard reality is different. You are none of those things. Psychologists have studied this pattern for decades, and what they discovered says a lot more about what you've been through than who you are. This video was made for you. If you've ever stood there with a request on the tip of your tongue and swallowed it, stay with me. Most people assume that refusing help comes from pride. It's ego. It's weakness disguised as strength. It's not wanting to owe anyone anything. But the real explanation is older than that, and it goes much deeper. Psychology has identified 3 distinct profiles of people who don't ask for help. 3 different paths that lead to the same place: silence, loneliness disguised as independence, the burnout that no one sees. 3 groups. And the most important thing you need to understand before we continue is that none of these 3 paths have anything to do with character. They all have to do with learning, with protection, with an intelligence that formed before you even had words to name it. Because if you're someone who doesn't ask for help, you weren't born this way. You were shaped this way. Here's how it happens. Let's start with the first group. And honestly, this is the one that goes the deepest of all. Imagine the following scenario. You were 7 years old. There was a problem. It might have been something small. You were scared, you were confused, you needed something, and you went looking for it. You went to the person who was supposed to be there. And what happened? Maybe nothing. The person was too busy, or they simply weren't there, or they told you to deal with it yourself. Or they reacted in a way that taught you, without saying a word, that asking was a burden. It didn't have to be dramatic. It could have been a silent, almost invisible pattern. Weeks, months, years of small messages saying, your needs are in the way. John Bowlby, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, identified exactly this pattern. He called it avoidant attachment. And what Bowlby discovered is that children raised in environments where caregivers were absent, inconsistent, or overwhelmed learned to actively deactivate their own needs. Not out of pride, out of survival. A child's brain is a learning machine. And what this brain learned was, asking equals disappointment. Asking equals being a problem. So the safest strategy is not to ask. Resolve it alone. Don't depend on anyone. This conclusion doesn't disappear when you grow up. You become an adult, enter the workforce, build relationships, and you carry this old operating system inside you. A system that still operates by the rules from when you were 7 years old. The psychologists have a name for the adult that emerges from this: hyper-independent. And in practice, the impact is this. It's not a personality trait. It's a survival response. It's an intelligence that formed under specific conditions to protect someone who had no other way out. You're not proud. You learned to get by on your own because, for a while, that's what you had to do. That's different. But the story goes even deeper, because the second group doesn't start with an absent childhood. It starts with something different and quieter. It starts at the moment when asking for help feels dangerous. Not physically dangerous, psychologically dangerous. Brené Brown, a researcher at the University of Houston who has spent over 2 decades studying shame and vulnerability, discovered something that seems simple but changes everything. For many people, the act of asking for help triggers a shame response in the nervous system. The brain records, I need help. As I am weak, I'm going to be judged. I'm going to disappoint. And the body reacts. Your throat tightens. The words don't come out, not because you don't want to ask, but because your nervous system has identified it as a direct threat to your identity. In daily life, the dynamic is as follows. You are someone who functions, who delivers, who solves things, who carries a reputation for being reliable, competent, and strong. And precisely because of that, the idea of admitting you can't handle it feels unacceptable. You build an armor, not out of iron, out of competence. You prove to the world that you don't need anything. And while you do that, you start believing your own performance. But the big question is, what exactly is this armor protecting you from? Perfectionism isn't a high-performance standard. For many, it's a defense, a way to never get close enough to judgment. If you never ask, no one finds out what you don't know. If you never admit it, no one sees where you fail. Incredible, isn't it? You're not unreachable. You're protecting something that was hurt before, something that learned that exposure hurts. And that makes perfect sense. And there's an angle almost no one discusses. The third group isn't about origins. It's not about shame. It's about memory. You've asked for help before. And what happened? Maybe the person helped, but with judgment disguised as care. Or maybe they used it against you in an argument later on. Or they said yes and simply disappeared when it really mattered. Or they made you feel like your problems were too big, too small, or poorly timed. Your brain registered that. Neuroscience has a name for this mechanism. When an action repeatedly produces a painful result, the brain updates its internal prediction. It learns. Asking equals pain, and the next time the situation arises, it activates the threat response before you even come close to speaking. In other words, you're not avoiding the current situation. You're avoiding the outcome that already happened. Your nervous system is playing an old recording even when the person in front of you has never let you down in their life. The big revelation is this. This isn't damage. It's discernment built on evidence. But, and here's where it gets complicated. When this system is so calibrated by past pain that it can't distinguish the present from the past, you start isolating yourself even from completely trustworthy people. You refuse help not because the person is dangerous, but because the act itself has been associated with loss. You're not running away from people. You're running away from a pain you still believe is coming. Let that sink in for a moment. Everything I've said so far is true, but it's not the whole story, because not all refusals of help are the same. And it's exactly this dividing line that will determine if this pattern is working for you or against you. There's a healthy version of this. You refuse help because you genuinely can handle it, because you prefer to work at your own pace, because the situation doesn't require more than you have. That's not a problem. That's autonomy. That's real strength. And there's another version. You refuse help and feel burnt out. You refuse and build up resentment toward people who don't even know you need anything. You refuse and carry it in your body. The tension, the fatigue, the loneliness of pretending everything is fine when it isn't. The metric is very straightforward. When you refuse help, what do you feel afterward? If the answer is relief, you're probably making a genuine choice. If the answer is more weight, more pressure, more exhaustion, you're probably trapped in a pattern, not a preference. One is a choice, the other is a cage. Walls block everyone. Boundaries are selective. Carrying everything alone when you don't have to isn't strength. It's burnout dressed up as virtue. And the difference matters because one sustains you, and the other will charge a price you shouldn't have to pay. If you've made it this far and recognized any of these patterns in yourself, not in your neighbor, not in a friend in yourself, this requires a level of honesty most people don't have. So let's bring this back to the beginning. What are you, really? You're not proud. You're not cold. You're not hard to love. You're someone who learned to carry your own weight because the world at some point taught you that this was the safest strategy. You developed this skill for a very real reason. In some context, it made perfect sense. But learned patterns can be updated. What was built in one context can be relearned in a different one. The brain isn't static and neither are you. Asking for help doesn't erase what you've built. It doesn't undo your competence. It doesn't expose you in the way you fear. It makes you human. And if you're watching this right now, carrying something in silence, leave a comment. It can be simple. It can just be, I recognize this. You don't need to explain. Just know that there are other people here who understand exactly what that means. There is nothing wrong with you. If you want more videos like this, subscribe. I do this every week for people like us.